excited. And I had been praying for a while about what to speak about, and I really felt like on my heart that I needed to talk about Jesus walking on water and kind of the significance of that story. Before I get into the significance of Jesus walking on water, I want you to keep in mind a couple of questions and ask yourself, what is the first thing that we do when we react to situations, when we're in the midst of a storm, or when we're in our times and our troubles? So that's kind of like the basis of what we're going to be talking about today, which is why I really wanted to bring up the story of Jesus walking on water. Now, before I get into that part of the story, I want to focus a little bit on Peter and where he was at, where his mindset was at, some of the things that he gave up in order to follow Jesus, and kind of start there. So I'm going to have you start in Mark chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 26. So starting in verse 26, and they were astonished out of measure, saying among themselves, who then can be saved? And Jesus looking upon them saith, with men it is impossible, but not with God. For with God all things are possible. Then Peter began to say unto him, lo, we have left all, and have followed thee. And Jesus answered, saying, verily I say unto you, there is no man that hath left house, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my sake and the gospel's. But he shall receive in 100-fold now in this time, houses, and brethren and sisters, and mothers and children, and lands with persecutions, and the world come to eternal life. But the many that are first shall be last, and the last first. So the first thing we see about Peter here today is that he had given up everything in order to follow Jesus. That was the sacrifice that he made as becoming a disciple. And in that moment, Jesus had said to him, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So we need to understand that Peter had the mindset that he understood that God could do all things, that with God nothing was impossible. There was no sky to the limit, that anything could happen with him. And he responded in that saying, we have given up everything to follow you. So that's the first point I want to talk about today. Now, moving into Matthew, we're going to go to chapter 14 to kind of give some more background about where Peter's at, where Jesus is at, before we get into the heat of the story. So the start of chapter 14, we see the death of John the Baptist. And John had been with King Herod, and he was at the request. His head was given on a platter, and he was dead. I'm not going to spend too much time on that sake, but the disciples had to go back and retrieve his body. So Jesus had lost one of his great friends, and so that's kind of where the mindset of where Jesus was and where the disciples were. Now, right after they had retrieved John the Baptist's body, we see them departing. So in chapter 14, verse 13 is where we're going to start. And this is, again, after they had just retrieved the body of John the Baptist. When Jesus had heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion towards them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitudes away, that they might go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. But Jesus said to them, they need not depart, give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, but we have here 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and he looked up to the heavens, and he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So we know from this story that the disciples had bear witness to the miracle of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, because they were the ones that received that meal to give to the multitudes. And not only was it 5,000 men, but that did not include the women and children that were also fed and the leftovers that remained after them. So at this point, Peter had not only understood that Jesus had said, with God all things are possible, but he had bore witness to some of these miracles, right? He had fully witnessed it. He had been a part of those moments. And even after the death, Jesus still continued to bless and heal and give them food, no matter what he had been encountering during that time. So we're going to move to the story of Jesus walking on water. So chapter 14, verses 22. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and go before him onto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. So again, this had just happened. I really want to put into perspective that the loaves and the fish and the feeding of the multitudes had just happened, because it states straight away Jesus asked his disciples to get into a ship. So immediately after they got into this ship. Verse 23, it says, when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up onto a mountain apart to pray. And it was when the evening was come, and he was there alone. So Jesus set his disciples into the ship, and he went onto a mountain to pray. In verse 24, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went on to them, walking onto the sea. So again, I want to point out the timing of this storm. So it is stated that in the evening he went to pray. But Jesus did not return unto the water to his disciples until the 4th watch of the night, which in different translations also means dusk or dawn. So there was a space in between before Jesus had come back to his disciples. And I know we've heard this before, but when we are in those midst of the storm, sometimes it is not immediate when he comes to us. Sometimes it is not immediate, because there may be some time where Jesus has a different plan, where you have to be waiting, where you have to be in the midst of that storm, you have to be in that trial for a moment before he can come and answer. In verse 26, we see, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit," and they cried out in fear. But straightway Jesus spoke unto them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." And let us remember that Jesus had already stated that with God nothing is impossible. The disciples had just bear witness at some of the things that he is capable of with the love of God. They had already bore witness to this. And yet when Jesus called out to them and said, "It is I," they still were fearful. They didn't necessarily believe that. And I mean, how could you? From the outside looking in, if I saw someone walking on water, I think I'd be pretty confused as well. I might also be fearful, because that was never seen before. That is not something that's normal. That is not something that happens every day. But yet, even after Jesus declared that it is I, it's me, don't be afraid, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And when you're in the midst of that storm and you're calling out to God and he's still not answering, or you're trying to plead with him that in the midst of your trial or tribulation, he's still not answering and you're still fearful, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why we're feeling that way. It's because we don't fully understand what we're witnessing, because we're so in our heads about whatever trial, whatever tribulation, whatever control we want to gain, because we don't want to give it up and understand that Jesus can help us out of that water. And we see that with Peter. Peter answered to him in verse 28, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto the water. Again, this is my frustration with Peter. He had just bore witness to all these things. He had just heard from the word of the mouth of Jesus that with God all things are possible, but yet it wasn't enough. He needed him to also be on the water with him. So he asked Jesus, let me come out with you. And Jesus said in verse 29, come. And Peter came down out of the ship, and he walked onto the water to go to Jesus. So there's a couple things happening with Peter in this moment. We see that he's out on the water now. He is walking the path to Jesus. He is walking with Jesus. Jesus told him to come on out. He answered that to him. He declared that to him. So he began to walk. But yet, we see in verse 30, when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink, and he cried, Lord, save me. Not only did he see it, he encountered it. And it still wasn't enough. He still feared. He still lost his faith. He lost sight of Jesus, who was right in front of him, who allowed for him to come out and meet him. He still lost sight. That in the midst of whatever trials or tribulations or whatever storms, when Jesus is right in front of us, when we know the answer, when we know all we have to do is ask for help and reach out our hand for him to pull us out of the water, it still is not enough. And at the beginning, I had asked, what is your first reaction when you go through these trials, when you go through these tribulations? Because whatever you decide to choose, whatever you declare is your next step, not only affects you, but it affects everyone else around you. And it isn't until you're sinking and you're fully submerged that you finally give it up and ask for God. Why? Why is that our reaction? Why do we have to be fully submerged? Why do the clothes on our bodies have to become wet? Why does our skin begin to wither? Why do we have to wait until we are in that moment to finally ask for Jesus, pull me out of the water? The disciples in that ship bore witness to what was happening. They saw Peter lose his faith. They saw him begin to sink. But what they also saw was in verse 31, and immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Immediately, Jesus pulled him right out. Not the next day, not the next hour, not the next week. Immediately, he stretched forth his hand and he pulled them out of the water. But Peter had to give up that control. He had to give up that idea that this was fake and that this wasn't real. He had to give that up. He had to take the hand of Jesus. And that's the step we sometimes miss, that we take the hand, that we don't just push it away, that we don't just try to do something else with it, that we actually physically grasp onto the hand of Jesus so he can pull us out. Because Jesus didn't immediately grab him. He waited. He waited for Peter to call out. He waited. Because we can't be saved if we don't want to be saved. We can't be saved from the trials. We can't be saved from the tribulations unless we reach out and actually grasp onto the hand of God to pull us out. And it says in verse 32, when they came back onto the ship, the wind had ceased. And let's remember that storm was raging. That storm was raging even when Jesus was walking on the water. The storm was raging when Peter decided to step out and join him. But as soon as Peter agreed, grasped onto his hand, walked back to the ship, that storm stopped. So I ask again, what is your first reaction to your trials, to your tribulations? Because when we choose to control them, when we choose to think that our way is better, it becomes a drug to us. That sometimes control can be so addictive that we decide to control not only ourselves, not only our situations, but the people around us because they're impacting our situation because of this, our coworkers around us because they're impacting our situation because of this, our families, our relationships because they're all impacting our situation, and we're not going to try to get out of it ourselves. We can't. Because we're just going to continue to sink and sink and sink and sink. And for Peter, he had just started sinking before he had asked for the Lord to bring him out of it. In verse 33, then they came that were in the ship and worshipped him, saying, of truth, thou art the Son of God. It doesn't say just Peter worshipped him. It said they all worshiped him, because how we react is going to affect everyone else around us. That's why it's just as important to identify when someone else is going through something and reminding them where that help comes from, because sometimes that's all that they need. Because the disciples identified, they understood why he was saved. They understood in that moment why that storm ceased. But they had to bear witness to that, to see Peter struggling, to then understand the significance of Jesus stopping that storm. I want to turn to Psalms 91. I think that this story has been weighing just really heavily on me, because I feel like we've just started the year and we've been faced with so much already, and it's just the start. And I think it's very important that even though it's a simple fix to all things, that we understand why it's so significant, that we understand why we are reacting in the way that we're reacting to these trials in the way that we do. Because it's always easy to say as an outsider looking in that when you're facing this, just pray about it. Just ask the Lord to help us. Because 9 times out of 10, that isn't our reaction. Instead, it might be to be angry, to be resentful, to gossip about it. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters to identify how we ourselves are reacting to these situations, because our help is right in front of us, and yet we still sometimes don't grasp that hand to pull us out. And even for someone like Peter, who again had declared to him that all things were possible with God, who had just bore witness to the loaves and the fish, and Jesus healing, even in the midst of his friend passing away and them retrieving their body. They bore witness to all of that, all those miracles, and still when he was walking on the water, they didn't believe. He didn't believe. He had to ask for more. And so in Psalms 91, we'll start with verse 1. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And I will say to the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snares of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. And He shall cover thee with feathers under His wings. Thou shalt trust His truth, and shall be thy shield and thy buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by the night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in the darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall by thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold to see the reward of the wicked. Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. We see in this psalm that the Lord is our refuge for pretty much everything, right? For everything. That it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a sickness. It doesn't matter if you're healthy. It doesn't matter if you're having an argument. It doesn't matter if you are feeling like you are self-destructing. It doesn't matter if you're overwhelmed. It doesn't matter if you're feeling that anxiety that everything just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and things just keep adding on and the pressure keeps adding on. It isn't for anything. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters, because when we have the Lord, we have our refuge, we have our strength, we have our ever-present help, we have every single tool that we could ever have in our toolbox. But again, I ask, what is your first reaction when you go through those trials? It is so incredibly important that we suffocate that stuff out of our life before it suffocates us, because then we're going to start to drown. You have to identify that. And it's not an easy task. It is not an easy task to self-correct. It sucks because A, no one wants to be wrong, and B, it sucks to self-correct because you are in such a planned process in your life that things become a routine, but your reactions become a routine as well. When you see some type of trial that you're going through and your first reaction is to go and rant to someone else about how much it pissed you off, that's something you got to fix. If your first reaction is to be angry about it and to take it out on everybody else around you, that's something you have to fix. If your first reaction is to try and control every single aspect of the situation so that way you can feel empowered by it, that has to be fixed. It's about identifying in those moments when we are reacting. It isn't about identifying in those moments what our first reaction is. Because in order to get better, you have to go through the trial of getting better. You have to go through the trial of getting better. And that's just as much a trial as your actual trial that you're trying to get through, because you have to go through it in order to get better. If following Jesus was easy, everyone would do it. But unfortunately, it takes some self-correction. It takes dying to that part of yourself. And it is just as much as trying to distract yourself from what is going on in front of you. In verse 11, we see, "For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against thy stone. Thou shalt tread upon a lion and adder, the young lion and dragon shalt thou trample under feet. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With a long life I will satisfy him and shew him my salvation." Again in verse 15, "He shall call upon me, and I will answer him." Peter called upon Jesus, and Jesus answered him to come with him. It says, I will be with him in trouble. Peter was with Jesus in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. I'm not sure if Peter did that in that moment, but he understood to call out to Jesus for him to reach out and grab him. And to just bring light on, we're going a little backwards, but verse 14, "Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name." If he knows our name, why don't we use his? If he knows our name, why don't we use his? And when we see and bear witness to those times when the ones around us are going through those trials, he knows their name too. why don't you use his? And so it's about what I have, which I know is not the full hour, but I don't know, I feel like there's really nothing more to say about that. I'll leave that where it is. But again, I really encourage you to take some time and reflect about what your first reactions are in those situations, about how you go about hardships, how you go about your trials, and what are you going to do to change that behavior? And what are you going to do to align yourself to grabbing onto the hand of God and allowing him to take you out of those situations? Thank you.